Hi, welcome to Adult Forum at St. Patrick's. For those of you who either were not able to join us at the beginning or had to leave early or just totally missed for today, I want to take a moment and share with you a little bit about the stories that we encountered this week and the questions that we pondered together, and then share with you some artwork that depicts the stories that we discussed and see how perhaps that reflects with your understanding of the story. So we continue with the path, a journey through the Bible. We started with officially with chapter 1, which was God saw it was good. And so we read the two creation stories for today. One where God sees that it was good, right? And we go through the 7 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. But each day follows a predictable kind of pattern, right? And God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let there be ... And it was so. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and morning on the nth day, right? The first day, the second day, and all the way to the seventh day. And then God rests. And then we hear the story about the Garden of Eden, the creation of people, and how God sets them out to help name him things like the creatures, to help God care for the creation. And in this version of the story, there are some noticeable differences from the original, right? And then finally, the chapter wraps up with the people's disobedience, and how the serpent changes the words that God said, that you shall not eat from any tree in the garden, is what the serpent says, but God has said that you shall not eat from this particular tree, right? And so how do we carefully listen to what it is that God says? And then we learn that the story doesn't tell us what kind of fruit the woman ate, right? We just assume it's an apple, but that it could have been a pomegranate or a fig or some other fruit tree. Father Stephen suggested that perhaps it was a banana tree. So whatever fruit tree you want to try and imagine that it could have been, but we just happen to always think of it as an apple. And so, anyway, there were some questions as well to encounter at the end of your chapter on page 17 and 18, things that to help you consider and question about, and then some next steps. So, one of those was to read John 1, right? In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And so, and it talks about light and that creation story in the New Testament that again is connecting us through time and space, with what God has wanted for us in creation. So we took a few moments to recap the stories together, to share the details that were important, to share with one another how we read and saw the stories. And then we went into breakout groups. And in the first group, participants were asked to consider what was surprising or interesting or exciting for them in the story. The stories that we read for today. So I would encourage you to do the same. What was it that surprised you or interested you or excited you about the stories of creation, and the disobedience of Adam and Eve at the end? So then we came back into a big group, and then we went out again, and we talked about in individual groups of about 4 to 5 of what it was about the story that challenged us. What did we have difficulty with? What did we wrestle with about the stories, or how the stories were different from one another? Just what was it that kind of spurred us to want to know more about God and creation? And we discussed those things together. Then we came back into a large group and talked about two major questions. According to Genesis 2, the human is put in the garden for the purpose to till and keep it, right? And so what that does is it suggests a relationship, as I mentioned before, between people and God's creation, the humans and the earth, and what does the passage suggest for us today about what it is in between our relationship between people and animals and people and care of the earth. And so then we talked about that before God sends out Adam and Eve from the garden, right? They've had this disobedience, and God is pushing them out of the garden. But first, God makes clothes for them. So, what do we think that it means that God would provide for them before the punishment or before the? We also had to talk about that, about whether or not we actually saw it as punishment or if it was just another way of God providing and giving us options, right? So, kind of you can do this. If we make another, God asks us to do this particular thing, but God also allows for us to make a different decision, and that God will still be there. But know that if you choose this other thing, this is what will happen, right? So, kind of like parenting to a certain degree. You have options. You can choose this or you can choose this, but know that if you choose this other thing, this is what will happen. And if you choose this thing, this is what will happen. So, right, there are actions and consequences to either decision that we make. And so we talked a little bit about what it is that we might learn from God and this action of clothing Adam and Eve before they leave the garden. We also talked about how that in God's comment to Eve about that there will be more birth pangs. Excuse me. Not that there weren't birth pains before, but that they were going to be more intense. And I had shared that, one of the things that I had grown up with was that there were pains because of what Eve had done and had somehow missed the part of the story that they were already there. So, what is it that in these creation stories that we need to pay particular attention to that perhaps we have either forgotten or that we never heard that part of the story before? And what does that mean about our understanding about it today? Okay, so one of the last things I wanted to share with you were some images of artistic interpretations of the stories for today to kind of help us ponder what that means for us. How does it help us with the story? That there are possibilities of interpretation and how these particular artists have chosen to see the stories today and share those with us through art. So we're going to look at Living Discipleship with Forward Movement is who has done our curriculum for exploring the Bible. And so they have put together a number of artworks for each one of our chapters for us to consider. So for today, we have the first one that chapter 1, God saw that it was good. And this is Adam naming the animals. It's from the 16th century. And then we also had the creation of the birds of the air and the fish in the sea. And then the creation according to Genesis. If you see Adam over here and Eve and the animals and the seas and the sun and the moon. It's another version of the Genesis story. And then, of course, we've all seen this one. As I teased with them, it's what the painting that all middle schoolers call the "Pull My Finger" painting, but it's actually Adam's creation from the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. And one of the things that Father Stephen pointed out to us was that during his sabbatical, he was able to actually go and see the Sistine Chapel, and that one of the things that their tour guide had pointed out was that this cloth right here that surrounds God and the heavenly host, that it's shaped like a brain, and that was done on purpose. And so that was one of the things that he pointed out to us about this painting, was the cloth that surrounds them that is shaped in the form of a brain. Here is one from the Met, the creation of the world and the expulsion from paradise. We noticed that the world is, if you can tell, it's round, right? And then up around God, what looks like wings. If you look really closely at them, there are little cherub faces with the wings extended off of them. And then that it is actually an angel that are kind of shoving Adam and Eve out of the garden. We also noted here that Adam and Eve are naked. However, the angel has a strategically placed flower. So whether that was meant to represent that angels were androgynous, right, that they don't really have a sex, or if it was part of a restoration at some point and the flower got added, if it's original to the piece, right? And then someone else had commented about the serpents down here at the bottom, down in the dust. And we talked again about what we had mentioned before about the trees, that we weren't quite sure what the fruit was that was born from you get, the story says that Eve gave him the fruit of the tree, and that you shall not eat the fruit of that tree. All right, so the rest of these we will come back to next week when we talk about Cain and Abel. So one of the things to ponder was to think about did these images enhance your understanding of the biblical story? Do they seem accurate to you, right? Either accurate to your understanding the story, do they seem accurate to the story themselves? Do they enhance or distract from your understanding of what the Bible lessons were? And is there anything that you feel like was missing, right? So if you had the opportunity to do these paintings, what was it that you would add? We noticed that, the Sistine Chapel, we have like this ripped Adam. And then in the last painting, where the angel is pushing Adam and Eve out, that they're kind of waif-like, right? So the different depictions of God's creatures, of the human beings. We also noted that in most every painting that we looked at, we're white. A white God, we're a white Adam and Eve. And so these depictions of, is that what someone, first humans would have looked like? And how does that change when we're talking about that all are made in God's image? And what does it look like to have an Adam and Eve of a wider variety of colors and races than just the white race, right? So we talked about those things as well. If you have any questions or you have other things that you have considered while reading or pondering that you would like to discuss further, you can reach out to Father Stephen or I, or save them. Next week when we gather at the beginning, we will do a summary of the story that we read the week before. So we'll do a summary of and God saw that it was good. And then, because this is just the very beginning, the story has just started, we're going to continue next week with chapter 2, the story of Cain and Abel and their notorious sibling rivalry. And then we're going to also be able to engage with the story of Noah, something that a lot of us have heard as children, but this gives us the opportunity as adults to hear the story differently and see how we might be able to engage with Noah in a different way. So we'll look forward to you joining us again next week, and finally leave you with the question of, how do these stories impact you? How do they connect with you and what you feel like God is calling you towards, or calling us as a community to be? So before we go, I'm going to say a quick prayer, and then we look forward to you joining us again next week. The Lord be with you. O God, who wonderfully created and yet more wonderfully restored the dignity of human nature, grant that we may share the divine life of him who humbled himself to share our humanity, your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Bye, everybody. I'll see you next week.